transition to talking about cold weather running. We'll kind of just spitball our way through some things that each of us use, some little tips about what we found works in terms of staying warm in the winter. But let's start up. I guess I actually filmed a video for work where I talked about for the two main things, and depending on who you are right now, you might be listening to this. You're like, I'm a super experienced runner. I get it. You don't need to tell me about how to stay warm in Wisconsin. I've lived in Wisconsin or Canada my whole life. Like, I'm fine. Or you might be brand new. So we're kind of gearing this section towards the new runners, because there's a lot of new runners in the last couple of years. And so we're gearing this to people who this might be their first winter trying to run. And they're like, can I even run through the winter? That's what this is for. So when you're thinking about, and maybe we'll have some tips about gear that we like that experienced people might be like, oh, I might try that one. So hope that makes sense. But what I said to the people in the video that I made for my work was there are two main considerations regarding safety when it comes to winter running. The first one is being visible. And so it gets super dark. Like, we just had daylight savings time, I guess, today, but it wasn't getting light in Wisconsin until like 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then it gets dark at 5 or 6. And now it shifts an hour. But at some point in the winter, it's not going to be light until 8, and it's going to be dark at 4. And so you're basically no time. If you have a normal, 9 to 5 job, you're not going to be able to run in the daylight. And so being lit on the streets is going to be a big deal. The second thing I talked about in the video was safety in terms of warmth, because obviously here, when you're getting down to the days where the wind chill is negative 25, maybe you consider not running those days. I do, but you got to consider how to be safe weather-wise from frostbite mainly, and maybe some hypothermia stuff, but mainly frostbite is the problem with appendages. So let's kind of start at the top. Matt, like, what do you get to the point in Southern California where you need a hat?
Not usually, unless
That's
it's
crazy.
raining, to be honest. And it may be that my head doesn't get that cold. The only exception to that is being up in the mountains. So if anybody, this year has been a little bit more challenging, but for anybody that's known me in the past, I spent a lot of time trying to get up to Mount Baldy, or a lot of the mountains, including up near Crestline. And so in the next couple of days, I'm actually going to be up at Wrightwood, trying to get away so I can focus on studying and prepping for my comprehensive exams for the PhD here pretty soon. But I haven't used a lot of hats. The only thing we use hats for, I think, is when it actually gets like way too sunny. And that's the exception I've used hats for.
But
when
not
it
like
gets
a winter
cold,
hat. You're thinking like a running hat.
No. Okay. Yeah, I'm more likely to use a hoodie or something that's got a hood on to cover my ears up, but rarely a hat for running, to be honest.
Okay. Cool.
Unless it's raining.
On my end, it's obviously it's a pretty different story. So one of the most versatile things that I've found for winter running is like a buff. And the reason I like them is because, they can, this is like a buff. This is one that I got from a race that I did in North Carolina, but just a long tube of material. I like them because you can wear them as like a headband in kind of the earlier parts of the winter or the late fall. And so they can kind of just sit here and warm your ears. And then what those transition to for me, once it gets to really, really cold and windy, is when I have, I put it and I cover my face from my nose down, because otherwise your nose is going to freeze off basically, and your breath might get pretty cold. And so a buff is really nice to protect both your face, and it can double as some stuff for keeping your head warm. But the main stuff that I have is a tight beanie. I use the Mizuno Breathe Thermo. I never know how to say it, but it's a very tight beanie that fits over my head. And what I like about that is it allows me to also double it up and just use one of my like thicker winter hats on the really cold days. So I can have two layers, one that's a beanie that's tight to the skin and kind of warms the sweat that you get. And then the extra hat can be the insulation. And so if you're going to try to run through the winter, I would recommend trying to get a nice beanie, and then any other kind of winter hat that you're probably using all the time anyway. Something that I don't use a lot, but I have other friends who do. I don't know if you've heard of like balaclavas. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, they just basically are like a big hood that you put on. And so this is a Gordini one that I've just had since my childhood, because sometimes that's just what happens. You got to exist out in the cold, and I snowboard, so I use it for my snowboarding. But on the really, really cold days, having a full hood that covers your entire nose, and it basically just keeps just your eyes open. So I think if you had to pare it down for the head, you need I think you should really have a tight beanie, a buff that can double for either a headband or your face, and then something bigger over the top. So a little bit different between, I didn't realize that you wouldn't even, like when I said hat, you didn't even think winter hat. You thought running hat.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the only time I did experience this, so I grew up in Portland, Oregon,
Fair.
and spent a lot of time up near Mount Hood at a small town called Welch's, and that is where I got to experience temperatures in like the 20s and teens, and actually pretty close to zero in the winter. And that's the only time, so not very common, but I can appreciate that now. But that was when I had started running.
Right.
I wish I had known more about that then, because I definitely remember having like snot freeze on my lip, which hurts.
Totally.
Especially if you don't know and you're like, oh, that's weird, rip, and you're like, oh, there goes all my skin.
Totally.
That hurt. Yeah. So, or like spit that freezes, or like when your eyes start watering. Like, yeah, for that reason, I can totally. And then ears.
Yeah.
I've had some frost nip on my ears pretty badly, and going, I might lose some skin here. Fortunately, did not, but Southern California, not as much.
That's very, very different. I actually, for those who are just listening, I'm rocking only a mustache right now. So you guys can tell me if I'm going to definitely grow it back out. I'm growing out the beard. I had some inspirations to go mustache, and I'm thankful I'm trying it, but long term, part of the reason I'm actually going to grow it back is in the winter when you start sweating, if you have a beard, the sweat will freeze and you actually get like face insulation from the ice. It's awesome. So you get like this natural insulator. And so I try to grow up my beard a little bit longer, because then once I'm a couple miles in, I feel really good. So that's kind of a fun thing. But let's move on to the hands. So I think I have two things that basically get me through 95% of the winter. These probably don't even need to be fancy. Again, I use the Breath Thermo stuff from Mizuno. So these are the Fleece gloves. And so they're very, very thin, but these work for me down into the teens if it's not windy. So I think when you think of winter weather, there's a difference between if it's, not humid and if it's no wind. But if it's windy and humid, it's going to feel 10 degrees 20 degrees colder. Wind chill is a piece of that, but even humidity, like if it's moist in the air, it even feels colder. So it's really going to depend on some of those things. But the Fleece Breath Thermo is what I use for most of my running. But then what gets me through the rest of it is if I have these windproof mittens. These are by Gordini. But I looked on their website and I couldn't find any more of these like really thin kind of running mittens. But I love the mitten aspect because I can put my fleece gloves into the mitten and it allows my fingers to kind of warm each other as its own unit. I've used other windproof stuff that are individual gloves, and it just doesn't do the same job that a mitten does because your fingers are isolated to each other. So they don't have kind of the heat exchange between them. So I really love having a windproof mitten to put over the fleece stuff. So that's kind of my hand stuff.
For me, gloves are everything. For years, I ran with cheap gloves that didn't do anything. And my hands, my extremities are super sensitive to cold. I will lose sensation. They will turn pink, white. I'm still wondering, I've never been diagnosed, but wondering if I have some kind of mild Raynaud's. So yeah, it's always been a problem. So especially with wind, it's rough. So I don't remember the company. I'd love to try the Mizuno thermal stuff because they do a really good job. But I just every year go to Dick's Sporting Goods or one of the local sports stores and just get like kind of the warmest gloves I can get. And I would err on the side of warmer, at least for someone like myself, because you feel fine the first couple miles, but it can get really bad, especially with long runs. And in Southern California, I spend a lot of time up the mountains, so that can get particularly cold. But the other thing that we get here is wind, especially in the winter, and that wind will rip through you.
It cuts you.
So I have a piece of gear that really has been helpful with that. but that wind will rip through you and take your heat away faster than you can think. So definitely gloves are one of those things where I would invest in. Yeah, it's going to be a couple extra bucks.
Mm-hmm.
You will thank yourself, at mile 12 or 15 when your hands are freezing and you can't get that blood flow back. So
Right.
That for me, high quality wind resistant gloves are really key.
Yeah. And I'll say two things on there. One, I wouldn't want the wind resistant for like the mild cold because you just sweat so fast. They're so warm.
Sweat.
So like
and then it takes forever for the gloves to dry.
Yes. So I like having something thin for a lot of and when I say mild cold, it's all relative, because if you're used to 70s and then it dips to 40 versus if you're used to 30s and it dips to -5, that's the same difference in temperature in terms of what your body is used to. Obviously, there's more actual risks associated with -5 than 40 degrees.
Yeah.
Like anyway.
Just
but
good.
I do like having, a breathable, thin glove. The thing I will say about this is a huge shout out to the Breath Thermo stuff. I was on a run last winter. It was -12 and -26, I believe, with wind chill. And I started off with, my beanie from Breath Thermo, my fleece, and then my my extra layers. And after 3 miles, I was sweating a lot. So I took off my hat and my mittens. It was -26, and my head and my hands stayed warm the rest of the run, just with these really thin gloves in -26. And part of that, and it seems like voodoo to me, but part of it is the technology in the Breath Thermo stuff is it's a material that heats your sweat. And so when you start sweating, it actually does generate heat to keep your hands and your head warm, or whatever the material's touching. So I have a base layer from them too that has the same material in it. That's a whole other, I would give that a different level of review. I love the beanie from Breath Thermo. This is last year's stuff, so I don't know what this year's is like, and the fleece gloves, but the base layer was a little scratchy and just fit really long, so it wasn't my favorite. But anyway, I like to have a little bit of both. Let's talk feet really quick, how to keep your feet warm. I do think this is where I'm really excited to test the Run Shield through the really cold because of the windproof nature of it. But a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford just a pair of windproof shoes for the sake of running in winter, and that's okay. Something that a good running friend of mine has done, and that works, is actually taking duct tape and taping over the mesh of your shoe. Mainly if you're watching, kind of just around the toe box here, because it's going to prevent wind from coming through, and wind is the real culprit of getting cold in the winter. So it'll windproof that. It keeps some of the slush and wetness from getting in and soaking your shoe. And so even if you do just a line around kind of where the toe guard would be, and then one little tape over the top, that can go a long way in keeping your toes warm. And that's a cheap option. It will get some stuff on your shoe, so you just have to prepare for that. But it's a cheaper option than getting a whole new pair of shoes for that. So just something to consider.
I like that. I've never thought about that. That's cool.
Yeah, this guy's kind of like a figure something out that you don't have to spend a ton of money on it.
DIY, do it yourself.
For sure.
Like that.
The other thing is, I think wool socks are great. Pretty much most major sock running companies are making some wool stuff. Like Features has some. I run mostly in Darn Tough in the winter. But wool is going to do a nice job of keeping you warm. Yep. Actually, the other Mizuno Breath Thermo is the socks. I have those too, and they're awesome as well. But do you have to change your sock stuff?
The socks I use, years ago found a bunch of Adidas socks. It was like the energy sock, and I bought like 20 pairs of them because they were really cheap, and they're actually thicker and compressive, and they've done a good job. My feet have definitely gotten cold with some of the mountain running I've done, so that might be, I might have to look at some of those Mizuno Breatho socks. But definitely do not do cotton. Cotton, in general, is not a great idea, but especially winter running is a nightmare, because as soon as your feet sweat, the cotton holds it, and then you're just going to start losing heat immediately. Yep. So good quality socks is important, and a little bit thicker can be helpful. The wool are really great. I have one wool sock. I can't remember who it's from, but it definitely makes a huge difference.
Right. The other thing, just in shoes in general. So I held up the Audio 6 before. That mesh is, you can see through it. There is a big difference between that and like a shoe that pops into my head is the Magnify from Puma.
Yeah.
Like that's a thicker upper. So just the nature of, a more traditional trainer, like, the Magnify would be one, or the Wave Rider, or the Saucony Ride, those that are sitting in that like daily trainer realm are going to have a little bit of a thicker, more robust upper, which does make a difference in sustaining some temperatures in the winter.
Versus racing flats are going to be a little bit more rough just because the uppers are so thin and breathable that any wind or cold is going to go right through that shoe.
Yeah, the mono mesh stuff is just not logical for Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It makes it harder to buy the shoes, to be honest. It's like it's hard to buy a racing shoe in Wisconsin, or not a racing shoe, but like a lightweight trainer sometimes, because you're like, if I'm going to only buy 1 or 2 shoes this year, that's not going to get me through the winter well. So it's a huge consideration here.
Right. For those in Southern California, we can get away with that more. But like, if you're running early in the morning, like for me, when I start at Kaiser, I start at like, I've got to get my run in starting at like 5 o'clock. So it is pitch black, and usually the temperature is still really, especially as it gets into the winter, we'll get into the 30s, and you're just starting there. It's like, so warming up in your trainers is really important, and having your car close by so you can change shoes, do the workout, get out of the shoes immediately, get back into a warmer pair is really important still. And that gets even more intense if you're up in the mountains. So having trained up at Crestline, Big Bear, you're getting snow up there. It's dipping down to the teens and 20s. So you got to see the racing flats don't last very long, or at least your feet don't last very long in the racing flats up there.
So a couple more quick things, and these are a little less technical, maybe more preference. So I think the last couple things that are big are having a nice pair of tights, and upper and then upper chest, like trunk layers are a big deal. So just having a bunch of layers is fine. But then also a wind resistant or windproof jacket can be like kind of locking you in. So Matt, do you have favorite stuff for either tights or jackets or base layers?
For tights, I'm kind of all over the place. I've got a bunch of different companies, and kind of it's just like a go-to of, if it's getting colder, I'm going to put tights on, just because it takes a lot longer like half tights. Also, if you're doing workouts, are good. Just know it's going to take you a while to warm up, and you're going to be freezing. Short shorts, split shorts are pretty rough unless like you're racing or doing workouts and you can warm up in pants first. But my go-to is any company's tights. I have a lot of Adidas tights because I lived in Portland and went to the employee store all the time. So those are my
cool.
I don't know what kind they are, but that's my go-to. My favorite right now, thank you Running Warehouse for getting me a couple of pairs of these. The Terex Parlay, I think it's Wind Ready, or their Windbreaker. This stuff, the additional part is me running at 5 o'clock in the morning. People are driving really fast, even on the streets here. So having something like this, where the material is really reflective and it stands out, is really good. But this jacket, it's not the warmest jacket. So if you're in the 30s, you're still gonna be a little cold. But this thing resists wind like crazy. And I have 2 different colors here, and I love these jackets. But where I train a lot, even though I live in Monrovia, I'll go up to the bike path in Azusa, and it goes through the canyon, and wind whips through there like none other. So you will be running through there, and it will be like 15, 20 degrees colder when you're in the shade and when you're getting hit by the wind. Yeah. And that can not only push into you when you're trying to run fast, but also it'll take the air out of you. No pun intended. So these, the material here, again, I don't overheat in these, but it definitely blocks the wind really well. So I love this. And they're super light as well. So for those in Southern California, you're not going to need the heaviest jacket because you'll get hot, but having a solid windbreaker will definitely keep you warm as as you keep going. There's a lot of things, if you overdo it too, you can overheat, which is a problem. But I really like this jacket just for the reflectivity. The color is awesome, and also just it stops wind really nicely. And those are sweet. As I mentioned, that's the biggest thing in Southern California, is stopping the wind, because it'll drop the temperature by a significant amount for you. Yeah.
In terms of tights, there's different thicknesses of tights, which is going to be important to consider. My recommendation is to get a mid to thicker tight instead of the really thin ones. If you're looking for it for warmth, like the thin ones around here aren't going to do anything for you through the winter. So I use a Rabbit. They don't make it anymore, but it's a Rabbit tight that's mid thickness, and it gets me through most of the winter. And when it's really, really cold, I just wear those, and then I put like joggers on over it, and I do much better. As crazy as it sounds, most of my, running friends wear wind briefs as well, because you do want to protect that area, and it gets wicked cold. So don't be afraid to get some wind briefs.
I have tons of those, because when it does get cold, I wear them underneath my half tights and tights, because I have had some chafing issues in the past. But especially when the wind picks up, if you just have your tights on and there's no additional protection, that wind, I can't speak for females, but men, that wind will rip right through you.
It's a problem.
So I highly encourage you to get some good solid wind briefs, because it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Because it'll knock the wind out of you.
My absolute favorite base layer, just transitioning quickly out of that.
Yeah.
My absolute favorite base layer on the top is the Rabbit Easy Tee. It is the softest. It's just awesome. So Rabbit did send those to us. So caveat there, but I wear it as my closest to skin base layer. It's pretty thin. It doesn't keep me super warm. It's best for like 30s and 20s, but like even when it's dipping low, I'll put that on first, because it's just so soft. And then when I layer on top of it, it's still comfortable on my skin. And then for me, I agree with Matt, like finding a wind shell that works for you. I've got a couple that I use, but don't have one that I really kind of lean towards, but some kind of wind shell. I do have a wind vest. It's another breathe thermo thing. But the vest is really nice because it keeps your trunk warm. And that's really where for the really cold days, it matters the most. But on the coldest, having a full length thing is really nice. So something windproof, at the top. Windproofing's going to be key when it really, really dips low. And you've heard that from pretty much every part of the body. So the last thing we'll talk about really quick is just lighting and making sure you're visible. So what I use right now, I just have like a camping light that I got way back in the day. It's an Energizer one. I probably got it at Walmart or something. I do like to have, at least 300 lumens to be visible enough. I have a guy in our run club has one that's like brighter than like when the brights are on a car. He's a big biker. And so he calls it his headlight. That thing's awesome, but it's very, very bright. And then I have an arm sleeve that I wear. This was just a cheap one that I bought online, but it works really, really well. And then I just bought a vest that I put over whatever layers I have, just so that I'm visible enough on the road. I know that there's stuff out there like Brooks make their Run Visible collection, which is sweet. It's like embedded within the material. That stuff's just expensive. So depending on what you want to spend money on, and stuff like this, like the arm sleeve and then the vest, they're not the most comfortable. Like it'll slide around or whatever, but it doesn't bother me. So I'm fine with it. But if you're somebody who's more sensitive to that and wants to like go next tier, there is gear like even Matt's jackets that have a lot of reflective nature or features put into them, which is kind of nice.
The Adidas logo is super reflective, and just the color pattern in general is really good for catching driver's eye. Like even, I have one of the Prime Blue. This Prime Blue from Adidas is really comfortable. It's a long sleeve, which has been really helpful. Cool. And it's not the most reflective, but the color pattern, like again, the more brighter colors, the more offset stuff is always really good in the winter, because it will catch driver's eye. And again, shout out for Running Warehouse for sending me some of that stuff.
Yeah,
being comfortable. But yeah, don't be afraid to wear brighter colors. Please don't be that person that's wearing all black in the morning.
No reflective stuff
when it's dark. Like if you need to wear something reflective, it's not worth the potential, because people are not paying attention. Holidays are coming. It's been a rough economy. People aren't thinking. They're tired. They're going back to work or going back in person. So just put something, even if it's a cheap reflective vest. That's what I spent the first 4 years of my running career running in the morning, and it's totally worth it. It means your safety.
That's what I got, and it's worth it for sure. Awesome. So we got to cover a lot today. 2 different shoes
well.
and then winter and cold running ideas. So if you guys have stuff that you love that we didn't mention, let us know. Or if there's things that you would like us to test for winter running, let us know and we can test them. We'll be able to find a way to either buy them ourselves or if we have a connection with that company. That's been the nice thing about kind of the support we've been getting is it does allow us to stratify what we test from, people who are supporting. They can be like, hey, what have you tested this? Can you test this? And if they want our opinion on it. So that's a cool part. I think that's everything, Matt. Are we missing anything?
Not that I can think of. We've gone through a lot today. It's a very productive session.
Cool. So if you have any questions, again, reach out to us at docsofrunning@gmail.com. Check out our website. Or you can reach out to us, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. But, I did want to give a little kind of peek into the future. Like I said, we're going to be starting to talk about kind of our picks of the year for different shoe categories, which is just fun. That's fun stuff. And talk about what's impressed us this year. We'll talk about the stability trends we've seen in 2021. And then we are going to be having some interviews with insiders within the running industry who both have been part of innovation and are developing new insoles that we're going to talk to them about. And then we're also going to talk to somebody about the supply chain issues that we've been seeing and just how that's impacting a ton of different companies. So hopefully that's insightful and helps us as consumers understand a little bit better what's going on with these companies and what they're going through. So again, reach out to us and thank you guys for with us. With us.